Thank you for joining us for this special edition of KPBS News. I'm Amitha Sharma. Many businesses hoped this would be a busy holiday weekend, but up and down California, the state is pumping the brakes on its economic reopening. On Wednesday, Governor Gavin Newsom announced 19 counties would reintroduce limits to businesses like bars, movie theaters, and zoos. Restaurants can still offer dine-in service as long as it's in an outdoor setting. San Diego is not on the list of 19 counties affected, but local health officials say our COVID-19 trends could put us there this weekend. Meanwhile, Governor Gavin Newsom is urging everyone to wear a face covering.
Again, wearing a face covering is a sign of toughness. It's a sign of resolve. It's a sign of someone who gives a damn. It's a sign of someone who wants to solve a problem, take responsibility. I think that's a beautiful thing. And I'll tell you, the spirit of our founding fathers and the spirit of the American spirit is one of taking responsibility. For the sweaty faces.
The state also put out a new public service announcement urging Californians to wear masks. Even though San Diego County is not yet on the state watch list, some new restrictions were imposed this week on local bars. More now from KPBS reporter Matt Hoffman.
It allowed us to open up without the food requirement, and actually sales have been very strong since then, but of course now we take a big giant step back.
Some brewery and winery owners are looking at this as a step backwards. They wish instead of officials placing restrictions on the entire industry that they just went after bad actors.
It'd be nice if everybody was treated, all the different businesses were treated case-by-case basis, but that's just impossible to do.
County health officials said all breweries, bars, and wineries that do not have a food license must close, and people can only order alcohol while eating a meal.
There was some confusion over what that decision was and how it will impact us.
Deft Brewing in Bay Park is partnering with Cucina Caprese to serve pizzas, but the brewery itself is not licensed to serve food, so do they have to close?
It hasn't been made clear. Do we have to serve the food ourselves, or can we partner up with the food trucks?
The San Diego Brewers Guild says members are also confused about new restrictions. County health officials clarified that bars, breweries, and restaurants do not have to be licensed to serve food themselves. Therefore, they can continue to partner with eateries to stay open. But the Brewers Guild says it's not easy to bring in outside food on a consistent basis.
It's really hard to find a food truck for every brewery every day of the week that they want to be open.
Next door to Deft Brewing is a brand new Lost Cause meadery location that is also partnering with Cucina Caprese to serve food.
We as a winery operate very differently than some other bars in the county, or just bars in general, right? There's a big difference between a winery and a bar.
Owners Susanna and Billy Belts have been open for just a couple of weeks and are concerned that restrictions are confusing customers.
How that will impact business, I think it's anybody's guess. Not only with people that do or don't want to comply with the new rules, but also the confusion it creates in terms of what can I do, what's open, what's safe.
While the owners would like to see some targeted enforcement of businesses not following guidelines, they say if customers aren't following the rules, it doesn't make sense to close individual bars.
You can target the bad actors, but nothing will get solved until we all approach this together.
The California Department of Alcoholic Beverage Control estimates there are hundreds of bars, breweries, and wineries here that could be impacted by the closure orders. Matt Hoffman, KPBS News.
As the economy opened up last month, America put a dent in its unemployment rate. Nearly 5 million jobs were added. The Department of Labor says unemployment is now at around 11%, down from 13% in May and nearly 15% in April. Nearly half of the new jobs are in leisure and hospitality. However, the report reflects conditions in mid-June and doesn't take into account recent pauses in reopening plans due to a spike in COVID-19 cases. CVS Health added 3 more COVID-19 drive-through testing sites this week. The new locations are in Ramona, Imperial Beach, and the city of San Diego. 14 others are also open across the county. The free tests are sent to a lab for results and returned in about 3 days. You can register online at cvs.com. And in National City, there is a newly opened community testing site. It's called the National City T3 Health Community Hub. Testing is free at the Kimball Senior Center on D Avenue. The efforts focus on the 3 T's: testing, tracing, and treatment. Mayor Alejandro Sotelo Soli says more than 600 COVID-19 cases have been identified in National City.
Even though we are less than 5% of the total cases, the rate of infection per 100,000 population is over 1,000%.
Residents can get a free test at any of these locations in the 91950 zip code. An appointment is required. Antibodies are not the body's only weapons against the coronavirus. KPBS science and technology reporter Shalina Chatlani reports the body also has special immune cells, and Salk scientists say they can be activated more easily than previously thought.
Our bodies have biological warriors, like antibodies, which can fight a virus. And we also have T cells. These white blood cells flare up when the body is infected with a pathogen and get rid of the cells that are infected, so the body can stay healthy, says Salk immunobiologist Susan Keck.
And so when the T cells see these differences, see these bits and pieces of the virus, that actually activates them. And then they have the ability to expand and multiply.
The lung is where respiratory diseases like coronavirus can thrive. So Keck and her team have been studying how easily these cells can be reactivated in the lung. In studies of the influenza virus in mice, Keck and her team saw that these T cells in the lung could recognize the virus and be reactivated more easily than previously thought.
There are T cells, specifically these memory T cells that are able to live for very long periods of time after the first infection. And these memory T cells can live a long term inside our lungs.
T cells in other parts of the body are currently being used in some treatments for diseases like blood cancer, but they still aren't widely used. So now her team is focusing on how the research and how T cells could be safely used in vaccine design for respiratory diseases like COVID-19.
A lot of the vaccines that we get, such as the childhood vaccines, the protection they provide are largely based on antibodies. But in some cases, we know that the antibodies may not be enough.
Keck says it's important to use a mixture of tools against coronavirus. And she says killer T cells can have some negative side effects, like killing too many cells in the body. So she says it's important to do more studies on how to harness their power effectively. Shalina Chatlani, KPBS News.
A big key to reopening the economy is reopening schools. In San Diego and across the country, administrators are struggling to find clarity for what students and families can expect in the fall. Bianna Goladriga takes a look at the risks for in-person education.
In what could be described as the country's most ambitious mobilization effort in recent history, school districts across the country are issuing plans for how more than 50 million K-12 students will be returning to school, some just weeks away. Officials in Marietta, Georgia and Nashville, Tennessee have given families 2 options for when classes resume the first week in August, in-person or distance learning. The Denver Public School District announced a return to full in-person instruction August 17th, with health screenings provided for all students, teachers, and staff prior to arrival.
We'll continue to monitor, and so we'll be ready for either scenario, in-person or staying in distance learning.
California, currently experiencing a spike in cases, says its 10,000 schools will have a plan in place in time for late August and September reopenings. In the Northeast, the governors of the states initially hit hardest by COVID-19, but now seeing a decline in cases, are hopeful that that trend will continue and classes can resume in the fall.
We have every expectation that our kids will return to their schools come September.
Continued isolation poses very real risks to our kids' mental and physical health.
Even states experiencing the brunt of the virus now, like Texas and Florida, are still planning for an August return to the classroom.
There's not going to be a substitute for that in-person instruction.
Experts agree.
We've seen massive public health consequences to these school closures in terms of virtual dropouts. We cannot afford, as a country, to keep our schools locked down for another year.
Joseph Allen is the lead author of a new report on risk reduction strategies for reopening schools. Among them, distance, hygiene, mask wearing, and proper ventilation.
We know these risk reduction strategies work, even with a full load of kids in the class. Kids are at lower risk of getting this virus. They're at lower risk of serious adverse consequences. Early evidence looks like they're at lower risk of transmitting to adults.
That may not be enough to convince many parents and teachers that returning to the classroom will be safe.
One jurisdiction, it's under 5%, and in another jurisdiction, it's about 80% or more of parents who say they intend to keep their children home. And so you can see how it's so difficult to do a statewide plan when even from community to community, people have such varying ideas about how they want school to look.
I think we're going to be in a hybrid situation where some children will be in school some of the time, all children will be learning virtually some of the time as well.
With some states issuing guidelines for reopening while others only recommendations, much of the decision-making is left to local officials.
I'm so glad I'm not in that seat right now. There's the pressure from the community and the staff for the plans to be released but releasing plans at this point with so many unknowns is what makes it such a difficult process.
That was Biana Goladriga reporting. Distance learning was a topic for a community conversation this week, moderated by KPBS. We talked with a San Diego school board member, a parent, and student about their experiences during COVID-19. You can watch it anytime on the KPBS YouTube page. In the past month, San Diego teenager Marlene Herrera has turned 18, graduated from high school, and decided who she's going to vote for in her first presidential election. She's done all of this while dealing with the enormous stress of providing childcare for her cousins and figuring out how to attend college virtually. As part of a collaboration with the world's Every 30 Seconds, which looks at the young Latino electorate in the U.S., KPBS reporter Max Rivlin-Nadler shares her story.
A group of 20 people surrounds Marlene Herrera out in a yard. They're mostly social distancing. The crowd is singing, urging her to not lose momentum.
It's been over 2 months. So I was like, oh my God, I get to see you again. I get to hug you. And I was like, are you okay with hugging?
Marlene is celebrating her 18th birthday and her high school graduation. They both fell on the same week that San Diego County began to relax its coronavirus restrictions on gatherings. She's just happy to finally have everyone in one place again. Finally, the piñata breaks. Marlene tells me she's had a lot of frustration to work through over the past few months. First, the pandemic hit, and then she had to complete her senior year from home. During that time, she's been living in a crowded house with 5 kids under the age of 9. Marlene says, in this new reality, she and many of her friends feel powerless.
A lot of us, we kind of got to the point where we burst into tears.
Marlene has been thinking a lot about mental health, and in college this fall, she plans to major in psychology. The mental health impacts of the coronavirus pandemic, especially on young adults, will be felt for years to come, says Tina Casola. She's a San Diego-based family therapist who specializes in trauma and the long-term impacts of stress.
We're going to be paying for this for a long time because the betrayals or the feelings of being left behind, those are going to last for people.
Casola thinks that while Marlene's age group is far more supportive of one another than previous generations, it's going to be up to older people to model how to get through this.
We have to figure out ways of getting out into our communities and giving them support to work through this time, even though none of us have the answer, right? We don't have a blueprint for this. We're going to kind of make it up as we go, but they need to benefit from the seasoning that some of us have had in order to kind of put these things together and then be able to take care of themselves.
The pandemic and its mental toll are not the only thing on Marlene's mind. She's grown up always worried about her family's finances. It was a huge relief when her mother received a stimulus check.
I think that was, amazing, especially, it's a big family here.
Marlene's mother had been briefly laid off from working at a law office, but she was rehired after her office got a government loan. Still, Marlene wishes more had been done during the stay-at-home order to prepare for reopening businesses safely.
For us, we can't afford to not work. We still got to pay rent. That's not going to stop. Right. You still got to pay for food, and that's not going to stop. It adds up. So it's kind of hard when people are like, oh, just stay home. And it's like, you can't do that. I don't want to come home and, be the one who infects my family for some reason,
The government's response, or lack of response, has Marlene thinking about how politics directly impact her life. After her first choice for president, Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, dropped out of the race in April, she was undecided on who she'd support in the general election.
If I could vote and for some way it could count for something, and I'm hoping it counts for something, like, I'm gonna do it.
More recently, she says the protests over the killing of George Floyd and other acts of police violence against black men and women have had an impact.
I think I'm leaning towards Biden. Not that I'm entirely happy with him either.
To her, President Donald Trump crossed a line when he sent in the National Guard during the Black Lives Matter protests.
You're just adding more fire. You're adding more fire to fire. And how is that okay? I think we need a change. As much as people want to say, Trump is good, but it's like, I think it's time for someone new. You can't still be living in that time where it's kind of like, what is he going to say? What is he going to trigger? Like, we've had so many scares with him.
Marlene says she's ready for a government that doesn't scapegoat or target minority groups.
It's not even just talking from a Mexican point of view, just a person of color point of view. There's so much oppression that we've had, and you see it, and, we're seeing it a lot right now. I just want a government that I don't feel like is working against me.
Looking ahead to a long summer of helping take care of her cousins and trying to safely see friends when she can, I asked her what she would change about this year if she had a magic wand.
I want to be selfish with this question.
Be selfish.
My senior year, because I worked, not even just me, like, everyone worked so hard for 12 years straight of our, whole lives in school, only for it to kind of be like everything a lot of us were looking forward to, we weren't allowed to do it.
Marlene says this will forever mark her generation.
It's still always going to be something that we have where it's like, well, we didn't get a grad night. That's just, my whole thing that's always going to stay with me. It's always going to be on my mind. It's always like, even when I tell my kids later on, if I have kids, they're going to ask like, hey, like, how was your prom? Well, I never had one. I'm sorry. Can't help you with that.
Max Rivlin-Adler, KPBS News.
The pandemic has put a hold on naturalization ceremonies at San Diego's Golden Hall, which has been converted into a homeless shelter. But thousands of local immigrants are still taking the oath of citizenship. Once again, here's KPBS reporter Max Rivlin-Adler.
Behind a community center in El Cajon lay the end to the long journey towards citizenship.
No tickets, nothing like that? No.
Perfect. Drivers are asked if they have any coronavirus symptoms, if they've been arrested recently, and if they're ready to surrender their green card.
You have your green card?
Sure.
They enter a roundabout.
Who's naturalizing today?
And hold up their right hand to pledge allegiance to their new country.
I hereby declare on oath that I absolutely and entirely renounce and abjure all allegiance and fidelity to any foreign prince, potentate, state, or sovereignty.
And just like that, they're citizens.
Congratulations to you both. You are now our newest United States citizens.
600 people from 68 countries participated in the drive-through ceremony on Monday morning.
I'm from France originally.
I am originally from Afghanistan, in Nangarhar province.
And Yucatan in Mexico.
It's part of an effort by U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services to provide a safe way to become citizens during the coronavirus pandemic. They've been holding these daily in San Diego since early June. One of those brand new citizens was Belinda Rodriguez.
Everything good? Woo! Yeah, everything fine. Woo! Congratulations!
Who was born in Mexico. She's been trying to become a citizen for 20 years. She came to the ceremony with her sister and niece. She didn't think her naturalization would be quite like this.
Oh, no, it's very different. Not in these conditions, but I'm excited also. So I'm very emotional and excited about it, and I'm very happy.
Without the monthly ceremonies at Golden Hall, which fits thousands of people, USCIS has had to play catch-up for the 3 months with no ceremonies.
It's actually really fun. So Golden Hall is a great ceremony, but this makes it a lot more personal almost, and so the officers get to participate in ways that they normally don't get to at Golden Hall. And it's really fun being able to talk to people as they're driving through and get to hear a little bit of their stories.
Perfect. Where are you from? Indonesia. Where are you from? Mexico.
Neera Renier from India came to the drive-through naturalization with her daughter and mother. She had become a citizen a decade ago at Golden Hall. Her mother was naturalizing at the drive-thru.
I called my sister and I said, I feel like this is so SoCal. Everything happens quickly.
They were going to go to Solana Beach to celebrate in a safe, socially distant way.
Last time I was in Gaslamp.
What each new citizen said they were looking forward to most this year? Voting in elections this November.
It's my first thinking to vote, yeah.
The drive-thru ceremonies will wrap up at the end of this week, as USCIS looks for ways to safely bring back larger ceremonies. In El Cajon, Max Adler, KPBS News.
We have focused on COVID-19 during this newscast, but now we want to share a story with added meaning this 4th of July weekend. The right to vote is something many treasure, some take for granted, and many more don't use. But how that vote came to be for women goes back more than a century in this country. As we celebrate the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, KPBS's Maya Trabulsi takes a look back at how San Diegans played a part.
Inside the Women's Museum of California, in a room lined with clothes, buttons, postcards, and political signs.
This was the poem.
President of the museum, Anne Hoiberg, reads from a poem written by a suffragist more than a century ago.
For the long work day, for the taxes we pay, for the laws we obey, we want something to say. Isn't that perfect?
But who were these trailblazers fighting for women's right to vote? And more specifically, how did San Diegans play a part? In 1895, Susan B. Anthony, the famous leader of the national suffrage movement, paid a visit to the then sleepy town of San Diego.
And the town was so excited, the famous Susan B. Anthony. She spoke at the Methodist Church, standing room only.
Determined that California women would get the right to vote, in 1896, Anthony led the first local campaign. The amendment passed in San Diego, but for the state,
down to failure, which was very disappointing.
At the time, women were considered to be morally superior to men, and there was a fear of what steps they would take in society should they be able to vote, particularly on the issue of prohibition. Women's suffrage could hurt the liquor industry. It wasn't for another 15 years, in 1911, that women would seize another opportunity, this time led by a local, Point Loma resident Dr. Charlotte Baker.
She would deliver a baby in the morning, and then the afternoon she would dedicate to civic duties. And so she became president of the San Diego Women's Suffrage Association.
Suffragists got organized.
Now the Temperance Army's marching.
With support from other prominent women, like Flora Kimball of National City, Ellen Browning Scripps, and attorney Clara Shortridge Foltz. The local suffragists used a three-pronged strategy they believed was sure to work. For starters, instead of protest, the women used the power of persuasion.
And these women would go into a man's home, and they would sit with that man and talk about the importance of women getting the right to vote. And they wouldn't leave until they convinced him. And they even said they were conducting invasions of men's homes.
The women took advantage of the times. The California Exposition was coming to San Diego, and Balboa Park was having a groundbreaking ceremony in July of 1911. For their second strategy, the suffragists would parade. They decorated a float with yellow ribbon promoting their clear message of equality.
And they called it the modern Boston Tea Party float. It also had on there taxation without representation is tyranny now as it was in 1773.
For the most part, San Diego County was still a rural town. Agriculture was highly dependent on the labor of women. The suffragists knew they had to reach the outlying communities by using their third strategy, automobile campaigning. The campaign started on a Monday morning.
4 women left San Diego for Oceanside. It probably took them several hours to get there. The roads were probably rutted, dusty, dirty, what have you.
From there, they drove to speak to men in Escondido, then to Fallbrook, and finally to Ramona.
Can you imagine? It took 3 days to cover our county, and it was highly successful. And then October 1911, and that was the big election day. Was it going to go down to defeat like it did in 1896, or would it be successful?
It was a win. The final statewide vote was close, with a margin less than 1.5%. In San Diego, the margin was wider, with more than 57% of men voting yes to grant women the right to vote.
When you think of the determination of those suffragists, it just seems unbelievable that the numbers weren't higher.
But the votes were high enough, and California became the 6th state in the country to give women the right to vote, all of which were Western states.
How do you explain that? But I do think it has to do with the sense of equality between men and women, the pioneer spirit, the progressiveness of people who would venture from the East Coast to come out here. To me, that's fascinating.
Maya Trabulsi, KPBS News.
You can learn more about how all American women won the right to vote in a new 2-part documentary on American experience called The Vote. You can watch it right here on July 6th and 7th at 9 p.m. on KPBS TV and the PBS video app. That's all for this special edition of KPBS News. For all of us here at KPBS, I'm Amitha Sharma. Thank you for joining us and stay safe.